Alrighty, so we were talking about prior to tonight, we've been talking about the whole concept of basically the Sefirot HaGenuzot and the Rishimo. The Sefirot HaGenuzot are the shorish of the oiros of the Sfiros, and the Rishimo is the shorish of the Kalim of the Sfiros. So, the question that we have to, that he's been addressing all along is the question of why is it that the oiros come from the Sefirot HaGenuzot? Like, what's the inyan? And he was explaining that any oir which is a giloi, any oir which is begiloi of any sort, or let's put it even more correctly, any or retzoini, in other words, any or that doesn't come about automatically, but it's his galus beratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, must have a tziyur. It has to have a tziyur. It has to have some form, some way in which it's mizgale. That is the hagbola of the oir. Even though it's not mugbal in the same way as the kalim, but it's called the hagbola of the oir, or the tziyur of the oir. And that is where the Sefirot HaGenuzot is coming. There's only Sefirot HaGenuzot, and not Ein Sof Sefirot HaGenuzot, as we'll see shortly. He's going to discuss this. But the Sefirot HaGenuzot give a hagbola in the oir, and therefore a tziyur in the oir. That's more or less where we were up to. I don't see anyone else trying to come in, so I'm just going to go to the whiteboard. If everyone could see. I'm assuming you can see the mimer now, right? So in Perek Yud Zayin now, and begin as follows: what are we talking about? What do you say? What's zeu? Is that the inyan of the Sefirot HaGenuzot and the inyan of the Rishimo correspond to these two inyanim, but Tzalmein Kidmuseinu. Now, Tzalmeinu is the inyan of Oirais, and Kidmuseinu is the inyan of Kalim, as we will see. The Kayal bechinas Adama Elion da Atzilus. That Adama Elion da Atzilus is has these two bechinas, these two. What's Adama Elion da Atzilus? In other words, the tziyur of Adam in Atzilus. What's the tziyur of Adam? That is the inyan of Moichin, and that is the inyan of Yadayim, inyan Raglayim. In other words, Moichin is the inyan of Chochmah Bina, or Chochmah Bina Das, and is the inyan of Yadayim, which is Chesed and Gvura, Raglayim, Netzach and Hoid. And even L'mala Mizeh, as we'll see shortly, we talk also about the inyan of Keser. We'll explain this in a minute. In any event, that this inyan of Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu, which is referring to Adam Elion da Atzilus, the Sefirot da Atzilus, and because Tziyur Adam. That these inyonim, wait a second, someone wants to get in now, and they can't get in. Okay. Problem is that I can't let them in now. Oh, I can. There you go. All right. I should be in now. All right. In any event, the Sefirot HaAtzilus is Tziyur Adam. That, as we said before, any situation with the Sfiros, they have what's called Tziyur Adam, because Nasa Adam is Adam, but Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. So anything that has a Tziyur Adam has to be B'Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu. In other words, it has to have some kind of Tziyur to it, which is exactly what he was just explaining. The Sefirot HaAtzilus and we can Tziyur Adam. And what's the Tziyur Adam? Gulgalta, Moicha, etc. What's Gulgalta is the skull. The skull, the Moichin, the skull represents the inyan of Keser, the Gulgalta. Why? Because it's makif on Moichin. Moichin is Chochmah Bina. Gulgalta is the skull. The Bechina of makif, the Bechina of Keser. So he's going to explain this a little bit more. But Tzalmeinu, when we talk about the inyan of Tzalmeinu, Ayin Beis like Nuzois b'Matzilan. What's the inyan of Nasso Adam Tzalmeinu? What's Tzalmeinu? Tzalmeinu is the 10 Sfiros. The 10 Sfiros, the Sefirot HaGenuzot. Now, what's the Sefirot HaGenuzot? The Sefirot HaGenuzot is the Sefirot in the Or Ein Sof before, depends on how we explain it, but before Olam Atzilus for sure. It could be the Sefirot in the Kav, but he did explain it in the last Perek that this could also be explained as the Esses Spherois in the Or Hashayach La'olamis before the Tzimtzum. There's three madregas in the Or before the Tzimtzum. There's Etzem HaOyer, and then there's Or Shebegilu La'atzmoi, and there's Or Hashayach La'olamis. The Etzem HaOyer, essence of the Oyer there, it's much more complicated to talk about the Inin of Spherois. We'll get to that shortly. Or Shebegilu La'atzmoi, there's also an Inin of Spherois, but it's Spherois and Kates. And when we talk about Esses Spherois or Esses HaGenuzot, that's in the Or Hashayach La'olamis. Since the Or is already an Or which is shaykh to Olamis, in other words, it has a shaykhus to the Indian of Gvul even before the Tzimtzum. It has a shaykhus to Gvul, it has a tzir in the Or, so the tzir in the Or is the Esses Spherois HaGenuzot. And that's what he just says. That from these Esses Spherois HaGenuzot, nimshchu ha'oiros to Esses Spherois. That's where the oiros and the Esses Spherois come from, as we explained in the previous prokim. They're the aspects of neshama. There's not only an aspect of neshama, there's also an aspect of ruach, and there's an aspect of nefesh. The nefesh is actually the kelim themselves, the nefesh of Adam Datzilus. The ruach of Adam Datzilus is the chayus of the kelim, and the neshama of Adam Datzilus is the oir in the kelim. Okay? So that's nefesh, ruach, neshama. Okay. This is what it says in Posuk Eliyahu, that flow, in other words, the flow of Chayus, Ihu Kanish Mesala Gufa, is like the flow of Chayus, of energy to the spheroids, of oil to the spheroids, is like the Neshama is to the Guf. In other words, it enlivens, it gives it a purpose, it gives it a tachlis. And that's the Indian of the oiros, and that's the Indian of the Esses spheroids. So that's all the Indian of a Betzalmenu, Betzelem Elokim. Now we're getting to our lower Madrega, which is called Kidmusenu. The Tzelem is actually the thing itself. It's only the thing in a certain tziyur. But Kidmusenu is only a reflection. So what's the Indian of Kidmusenu? That's the Kalim, as we'll explain. Kidmusenu b'chinas harashimu. That is the Indian of the Rashimu. Again, the Rashimu is the Koyach HaGvul that's left, that remains after the Tzimtzum. It's the Koyach HaGvul before the Tzimtzum becomes the Rashimu after the Tzimtzum. So, Kidmusein begins the Rashimu, Shemimeno Shoresh HaKeilim Da'atzilus. That's where the Keilim of Atzilus come from, Shem Bechinas Gufa. That's what's called Gufa, the Guf, the body, so to speak, as opposed to Nishmasa. Nishmasa being the Neshama of the spheroids, which is the end of the oil. Here we're talking about the Keilim, the Gufa. Oh, Or Ein Sof Atzmoi, but Or Ein Sof itself, in other words, Etzem HaOr, or even higher than Etzem HaOr, Atzmus. Although we're talking about the Or Ein Sof, so we're talking about Etzem HaOr. In any event, again, there's three madregas in the Or. There's Etzem HaOr, Or Shebegilu La'atzmoi, Or HaShayach La'olamis. In Etzem HaOr, which is what he's talking about now, he's explaining Or Ein Sof Atzmoi, Lo Shayach Bo B'chinas Adam. Even the Etzem HaOr is not shaykh b'chin of Adam. Ki lo Adam hu, because it says over there, lo Adam hu lehinachem. It's a posuk in Shmuel. Lo Adam hu lehinachem. He's not a human being that he should regret or relent or whatever. That's the posuk, and from which we derive that lo Adam hu is not. There's no b'chin of Adam over there. Ubahabiyur, he's now going to discuss a very important mimer of the Alter Rebbe. The early mimer of the Alter Rebbe didn't write down himself. They were written by his Chassidim. And there is a sefer called Hanochas Haraf. Right? Hanochas Haraf. Hanochas Haraf Pinchas. Also, I can order. Okay, So, in the Sefer Shishim Hema Malachos, which is a posuk in Shir Hashirim, in this mimer, which is a mimer of Rav Pinchas, mimer Haraf, I can unmute you if you want. All right, whatever. You can unmute yourself, or I can unmute you, whatever. Okay. Ubehabiyah the Shishim Hema Malachos, in the beer of this mimer, Ksav Yara Rav Pinchas Zal, which is written by Rav Pinchas, one of the early Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, Kasav, and this is what he writes. V'chol Sfira, Lo shayach likroi ba'atzmusoi and mahusoi, ra bechinas orein sof. It's only shy to talk about spheroids in the oir, not in atzmus. Now, the question is whether we're talking about etzema or we're not talking about etzema or. We'll get to that later. He's going to discuss it in a later mimer. But in any event, right now we're saying that only in Asmus Mahus is not shaykli in the spheroids, only in Etzem Mahus HaKadosh Baruch. But in Orein Sof, in any madrega of Orein Sof, shaykh likroi b'shem spheroids. Avalog is Esses spheroids, not necessarily Esses spheroids. Esses spheroids is in the Or HaShaykh L'Oilemis. Since the whole union of the Oilemis is that the Dafka Esses spheroids Esses V'Lotesha Ve'Esses Lo Acharasar, as it is in Sefer HaBoyer, right? There's only Esses spheroids in the Oilem HaTzilus. Therefore, in the Orein Sof, which is Shaykh to Oilemis, or HaShaykh L'Oilemis, there you will have the union of Esses spheroids. But Lamalim is in Or Shebegilul Atzmo, and for sure in the Etzema Or, there's no union of spheroids on the mispar of Esses spheroids. It's very spheroids bechinas bilti mispar. Ki gam bechinas Orein Sof ein mispar. In Orein Sof there's ein mispar. In other words, it's not the union of 10. Aber mahus ma'as mutzov and ma'as mutzov lo shayach spheroids klal ad kan l'shoyno. But in atzmus mahus, not shayach to even talk about the union of spheroids. Not shayach. Nishma lefizeh. So we understand, therefore, the gam ba'orein sof a bilti mugbal shalamayim yakav shayach spheroids. The or that's lamayim in a kav. Don't forget, the kav is after the tzimtzum. It's nimshach after the tzimtzum, but it's attached to the or, so to speak, lamayim in a tzimtzum. Right? It's attached via the tzimtzum, but it's nevertheless attached to the or lamayim in a tzimtzum. And that, or even though it's called an orein sof bilti mugbal, and it's l'ma'alim min hakav, it precedes the tzimtzum. Nevertheless, it's shaykh the union of Esses spheroids. Sorry, shaykh the union of spheroids. Even in that or, even in the Orein Sof. So Orein Sof, a shaykh lo'elim is shaykh the union of spheroids. Rak b'musa b'atzmus, hama or lo shaykh spheroids klal. But in musa and atzmus, hama or not shaykh spheroids at all. Now, this whole discussion of whether there's spheroids in the madrega of etzema or and spheroids in the madrega of or shebegilul atzmo, if you want, you can go look in Mishnah's Chabad where I discussed this inyan at some length and bring you all the makoros. In any event, you'll get to it later on, but just to if you're eager to see what it's about, have a look over there. Since the or is an inyan of Giloi, all or is an inyan of Giloi. V'chol Giloi inyan spheroids, and every Giloi has to come with a tziyur, the tziyur of spheroids. La'achein shai spheroids gambol rab ligvor, and therefore you can have the inyan of or of spheroids even in the or lifnei hatzimtzum. U'mikol makom mispar esses spheroids agnuzois. Nevertheless, the concept of esses spheroids agnuzois, shloimed lo shayach rak b'shorish hakav. You can say that it's only shaykh in Shorosh HaKav. What's the Shorosh HaKav? Ha-or ha-shaykh lo-oilemis. That's the Shorosh HaKav, right? So therefore, the Esses Spheroids HaGenuzot and the or ha-shaykh lo-oilemis. Sham shaykh lo-oilemis Esses Spheroids HaGenuzot. Shebechim is mamalik kol almi. That's going to be mamalik kol almi. Masha enka in the end of or shebegilul atzmoi. That's already soiv kol almi. And then there's etzema or, which is called, which is etzema or, right? So in any event, the Esses Spheroids HaGenuzot, which is an in of mamalik kol almin, that's only shaykh and or hashaykh lo elemis. A kamosha hu b'shosha makor bor and zobohu the is the or mamalik kol almin b'chines esses spheroids, and since the or later on, when it is taka mamalik kol almin, in other words, when it's already the kav and it's mislabish in oilemis, it's the in of esses spheroids. Therefore, al kain gam shosha or shaykh loima esses spheroids like nuzois. Even in the church and the or hashaykh lo elemis before the tzimtzum, we could talk about Esses Spheroids like Nuzos. Masha ain't kind of orange of a bligvul, but when we talk about the orange of a bligvul, because the Shorosh HaMakor or Soiviv Kolomin, or Yesh Mispas and the Mispal Spheroids. Try to talk about spheroids, but not that there's a limitation in the spheroids. It's a spheroids blim mispar. And not only are they spheroids blim mispar, in other words, each sphera itself, the number of spheroids is bligvul, the number of spheroids is bligvul, but also not only that, the sphere itself is bligvul. So there's bli gvul Sfiros of bli gvul. That's what he's explaining. There's an unlimited amount, an unlimited number of Sfirot. If it's shy to talk about a number of Sfiros, it's unlimited. Not only that, for Sfiros Gufa, the Sfiros themselves, Pshitus. What does it mean, Pshitus? Pshitus means bli gvul. There's no hagbola in them that you can say, this is what it is. But Pshitus means you can't even say what it is. There's nothing to say. There's no descriptions, no adjectives that fit. Where the adjectives come from, they only come from Kalim later on. But here, since we're not talking about the Indian of Kalim, we're talking about Esa Spherois. I'm sorry, we're talking about Esa Spherois Bligvul. Bligvul in number and Bligvul in character. Therefore, it's not shy to talk about the Bechinas Pshitus, as he'll explain. Shazeh Indian Bligvul Sha'en Akbalo Mispar. This Indian of Pshitus is the Indian of Bligvul. What does it mean? Sha'en Akbalo Mispar Spherois. There's no limitation to the number of Spherois. By Sfiras Atman and the Sfiras themselves are, each Sfira is Bechinas Bligvul. And Vi Bligvul means Hainu Bechinas Pshitus, as we'll explain later on. In Perek Pei Gimel, actually, this is wasn't filled in, but that's where it is. In Perek Pei Gimel, he will explain that what the Inyan of Pshitus is, and that Inyan of Pshitus is the Inyan of Bligvul in the Spherois. So we have two qualities in the Spherois. There's the Spherois of Shaykh Lo'olamus, where there's Esa Spherois, and then there's the Spherois where there's Bechinas Bligvul. That's B'derech Klal explained as in the Orsh Begilul Atzmoi. The Spherois Bligvul, and each Sphera itself is Bligvul. As is explained when we get when the Alter Rebbe explains the Inyan Antu Chad V'lo B'chushban, you are one without number. Meaning to say, since he's one in essence, therefore you can't, there's no number is not shaykh. The hainu be his pashtus and shiur. Each sphera is bebechinas bligvul, that's mispashet bligvul and shiur. Shezein spheras and kates. And it's terminology that's used elsewhere. Spheros and kates is this very Inyan of below Chushban, or lo b'chushban rather. Okay. Umamela, since it's Spheros and Kate, since it's his pashtus and shiur, Mamela kol his pashtus u'b'chinas chad. The entire thing is all one thing, because it's not mispashet as this divided from that. That's kula chad, right? Everything is mispashet infinitely, and therefore it's kula chad. And the Idra is part of the Zohar, one of the more abstruse and mystical Sforim of the Zohar. The Zohar itself is, there's a lot of midrashim, there's a lot of stories and things like that, but the Idra is one of those places which is very, very difficult to understand and very mystical and a lot of secrets in the Idra and in the Idra Rabbah. In any event, the Idra gives a moshel for this. Kahai botzina, like that candle, that ner, botzina is a candle, a ner, menorah, the spasha lechol star v'ivar. It spreads out everywhere. It spreads out everywhere, in every direction. The light doesn't spread in one direction only or the other direction only. It spreads out everywhere equally. But when you want to know them, when you have a look, and you're trying to see what the origin of that light is, and you're trying to analyze the oir, leminda means to know it from Ocean Das. And when we want lemindalon, to know this inyan, you'll only find one ner. In other words, afal that it's mispashed in every direction with every type of hispashtus and so on and so forth, it's spheres and kates. Nevertheless, when you have a look, there's only one. It's all the same thing. It's all the one or. Okay, so that's the or, essentially the or should be gilu la'atzmoi. U'ba'atzmus hama or lo yesh spherois klal. And in the end of etzema or, there's no. He says etzema ma or. Again, there's a machlokas about this. Not a machlokas, but a discussion whether there's spheros also, even in the or of etzema or. Here he's saying it in the or in the ma or there's no spheroids, but maybe in etzem or there is. Anyway, we'll get to that again on another occasion. In another place, it's explained the hainu. In other words, later on, mavur the hainu b'chinas etzem or. Here we're talking about etzem or k'mo shekalu b'atzmusay. The etzem or as it is in atzmus, there it's not shaykh es spheros, but the etzem or as it's begilo, it's shaykh the inyan of spheros, but these are also spheros which can't really be spoken about and for sure, but b'chinas bligvul and so on and so forth. So the or when it's kalo b'atzmusay, that she'enu b'chinas hamshocha v'gilui klala min atzmus. It's not b'chinas gilui at all, and therefore there it's not shaykh to talk about the inyan spheres. Lo shaykh sham spheres klal. It's not shaykh over there in that madrega in the or hamnichlal b'ma or it's not shaykh spheres, but in the etzema or as it's not nichlal in atzmus, it maybe is shaykh to talk about the inyan of. Oh, someone's in the waiting room. Oh no. I didn't notice. All right. That's what happens when you come late. Okay. Hi, Ruth. Sorry, I didn't notice you were in the waiting room. Okay. In another place we explained. Oh, we got that. I'm sorry. The next line. And just as in the Orein Sof, before the Tzimtzum, there's two madregas. What are the two madregas in the Orein Sof? One madrega is in a bligvul, that it's infinite, and the other madrega is a shaykh to gvul, the shurish of the kav. Those are the two madregas in the Orein Sof. So too, he's going to explain them. Ha'alav bechinas ha'or shu bechinas ein sof bechinas bligvul. One aspect of the Orein Sof is that it's bligvul. V'habeis, the second aspect of the Orein Sof, that is the shurish makor hakav sheba Orein Sof. It's the root and the source for the inyan of the kav later on, and the whole inyan of the kav is moedeid medidois. That's what you need a kav for. A kav is a line, right? A line has dimensions. It has a beginning, and has an end, and has dimensions. Alpha P, that the kav itself, that the rashis of kav is really the inyan of Or Ein Sof, but nevertheless, the kav is explained as, it's seen as something that has Hagbola, and its whole inyan is to make Hagbola. So, but it's a Hagbola of the Or, not a Hagbola of the Kelim. Okay. Vabei shorish makor hakav shebo Or Ein Sof, shain eses v'lis hagnuzois. The shorish of the kav is the eses v'lis hagnuzois, as we've been saying all along. Okay. K'mo kain hu b'madrega she'achar hatzimtzum. So too, just as you have the two madregas in Or Ein Sof before the tzimtzum, one is the inyan of bligvul, and the other one is the inyan of shurish gvul, or it's going to be shaykh to gvul. So too, you have in after the tzimtzum, you have two madregas. K'mo kain hu b'madrega she'achar hatzimtzum. Post tzimtzum, b'bchinas keser da'atzilus. In keser, you also have two madregas. Hinay b'chinas keser be'etzem harezel l'mayla b'bchinas eses spheros. The whole inyan of keser is not counted amongst the eses spheros. When you're counting 10 spheros, you usually start from chokhmah. Chokhmah, Bina, Das, and so on and so forth, all the way down to Malchus. But it's possible to count Keser as well, and he's going to explain why. So in the Indian of Keser, it could be that there would be Spheros Ein Kates, because it's not shaykh to the Spheros per se. It's a much higher madregas. It's Bligvul compared with the Gvul of Chokhmah, as he will explain. And the fact that, as we know, Chokhmah Stima'ah is the Chokhmah of Keser, and it's spoken about in Zohar and in many in Arizal and in many Mamorim of the Rebbeim. Chokhmah Stima'ah, the hidden Chokhmah, that's Chokhmah Shebekeser. That's what it's called. It's called Chokhmah Stima'ah, the hidden Chokhmah. And there's also the inyan of Midoy Shebekeser. There's also the inyan of Midoy Shebekeser. In Keser, what's the inyan of the Midoy Shebekeser? Essentially, the inyan of Midoy Shebekeser is what's called Arich Anpin. Arich Anpin is the shorish of Zer Anpin. Arich Anpin is Bechinas Gadlus, and Zer Anpin Bechinas Katnus. But it's the same Bechina. It's the 6 spheroids of Zer Anpin are found in Keser as well, called Arich Anpin. It's Chitzonius Keser. The outer Madrega of Keser would be called Arich Anpin. The inner Madrega of Keser is called Atik or Atik Yoimin. And then there's a higher Madrega in Keser, also called Resha Deloisiad at the beginning, which is not known, but he doesn't get into it now, so we don't need to get into it. But he's going to explain. Since there's the Indian of Chochma Shebekesa and there's the Indian of Midah Shebekesa, Shein Shorsha Esas Sfiros to Oiros, that this would be the root of the Esas Sfiros of the Oiros, not of the Kalim. Kamo Shein Klulim Bekesa, as they are in Keser itself. But Keser itself transcends the inner Sfiros. Yes, it's true that it has the Madrega of Chochma and the Madrega of Midois and so on and so forth in Keser. But the etzem Indian of Keser is lamayla mi hasfiros shebetoicha. That's only chitzonius a Keser that has spheres. Primus a Keser doesn't. Well, pize yuvan mashukasu va'chochma ma'ayin timotze. And therefore we can understand what it says, a posuk in Eoiv actually, va'chochma ma'ayin timotze. That chochma comes out of ayin. This havas chochma ma'ayin de Keser hu bechinis yesh mi ayin. That when Chochma comes out of Keser, it's called Yesh Mi'ayin. That's the prime example of Yesh Mi'ayin is V'chochma Ma'ayin Tamatza. Comes out of the Ayin of Keser. What's Ayin? Ayin is Keser. Right? That's the V'chochma Ma'ayin Tamatza. Chochma comes from Keser. But it comes out in a way of Ein Aroch. Right? What does Ein Aroch mean? It means you can't compare the two things. There's no path that you can trace from the Yesh of Chochma, in other words, the Metzius of Chochma, Ma'ayin Timotzei, the Metzius of Chochma, to the ayin that preceded it. There's no kesher between. There's like a gap. That gap is not possible to traverse. Why not? Because otherwise it wouldn't be ayin aroch. It would be beberech. You could say, oh, this is a high madrega chochma and a high madrega until we get to keter. No, it's not like that. It's ba'ayin aroch, as he'll explain. The haynu ba'ayin aroch, right? So ket chochma to keter is b'chinas ayin aroch. Ba'ayin aroch. So then he asks the question, elsewhere it says that Atzilus is called Gilui HaHelem, the revelation of what was previously Behelem, what was previously concealed is now revealed in Olam Atzilus. That seems to be a contradiction. On the one hand, you're telling me that Chochma is Yesh Mi'ayin. On the other hand, you're telling me that the world of Atzilus, which the Ikka Sphira in the world of Atzilus is a Sphira of Chochma. Chochma Mekanan Ba'atzilus. Bina Makana be Kursaya, that's the Olam Abriya, and so on and so forth. And Zoh is the Ike Inyan of Olam Yitzira, and Malchus is the Ike Inyan of Olam Asiya. In any event, so it says in various places that Atzilus is beginning Giloya Helem. So how can you have both things? How can it at the same time be Yesh Mi'ayin, Ba'en Aroch, and Gilui Helem, because Gilui Helem just means that it was there before with Bechinas Helem, and therefore it is be'erech one to another. There is some kind of relevance of one to the other, of what was previous and what was subsequent. So he explains, that the spheroids of Atzilus are called Gilui Helem. Hainu lagabe shorosh makor es spheroids. Moshe Kluli Bechinas Keser. That's only when is a Gilui Helem. It's Gilui Helem of what was included in Keser. What was included in Keser was not the Iker Inyan of Keser, was not the Iker Madrega of Keser. The Iker Madrega of Keser is Keser Lamal Min Spheroids. But the spheroids, as are included in Helem, that's included in Keser Behelem, that you can say that Atzilus came out from Helem of the spheros that were hidden in Keser. Their Atzilus emerged from that, right? So therefore we have the Indian of Gilui HaHelem. The Indian of Gilui HaHelem. But there's another Madrega in Keser which, compared with that, Chochma is Yesh Mi'ayin, and therefore all the spheros of is Yesh Mi'ayin. If Chochma is Yesh Mi'ayin, Kol Shekayim Kal V'Choyim Bina and Chesed and Gvura and so on and so forth. All right, so he's going to explain this. The Or HaChochma Da'atzilus L'Gaba B'chinas Chochma Shebekeser, that the light of Chochma V'Atzilus compared with Chochma Shebekeser, which is again called Chochma Stima, in the Zohar, Chochma Stima, the hidden Chochma, Hazbekin is Gilo Helen. So like about that Indian, there's a shaykhs of Chochma here, Chochma there, Chochma na low madrega, Chochma na high madrega. Obviously, there's a kesher between them. The Chochma Stima and Chochma Vatzilus are a shaykh one to another. There is a relevance. Hazbekin is Gilo Helen. Ma'achashagam, Chochma Shabakesa, Ubekin is Chochma. It's also Chochma. Yes, it's Chochma Stima, but it's Chochma. V'gam shehila ma'ila ma'ala v'bechinas Chochma Ilah, even though Chochma of Keser, Chochma Stima, is much higher than Chochma Ilah, Chochma Vatzilus. Kanal be'inyan shtok kach ala b'machshava, as we said previously, when we said kach shtok kach ala b'machshava, don't try and think there. It's not trying to think in the Indian of Keser. Nevertheless, Mikoma Kom Hare Gam Hi Bechinas Chochma. Nevertheless, Chochma of Keser and Chochma Vatzilus are still called Chochma, both of them. Elashi Chochma Ne'elama. The Chochma in Keser is called Chochma Ne'elama or Chochma Stima, the hidden Chochma. Shelaman Me'asech V'atama Musag Chulu. And the other Chochma is called Chochma Gluya, or Chochma Ilah, right? The revealed Chochma in Olam Hatzilus. Va'ikar Mashi Hilaman Misech LaMusag Ulagabi Kli HaChochma. Obviously, even even more so is there the union of when we said that that Chochma of Keser is built-in musag, it can't be explained, it can't be understood. How much more so when we're talking about the Kli of Chochma? There we're talking about even the aura of Chochma Vatzilus is not masig Chochma Stima, kol shekain the Kli of Chochma Vatzilus is not masig, cannot grasp and understand and relate to the Chochma of Keser. The Mashe Ora Chochma Bechinas Seichel Musag Kfi Mehusa Kli, as the Mashe Akli Poilba, or the fact that there is Chochma, the Chochma Museges in Olam HaTzilus, that's because of the effect of the Kli on the Or. The Kli is Magbil, it limits the Or, and therefore you can have a Hasoga, you can have an understanding. Once you know that there's limitations, you can figure out what the limitations are, you can understand the limitations. Even though it's a very high Madrega, but it could still nevertheless be understood because of the limitations of the Kli. But the Or itself is much more sort of fuzzy, it's more difficult to compare that. As you'll say. Well, Cain, and therefore, when we're talking about Moichin Stima is Chochma Stima, the same thing. Or a Chochma Buchinas Erech, Buchinas Gilu Me'ahelem Chulu. Therefore, Chochma Stima and Chochma Hagluya, there's a kesher between them, there's a connection between them. There's, you can, there's someone else in the waiting room now, boy. How do we let them in? Zohar. Okay, here we go. All right, the Zohar just came into the meeting. Shalom Zohar. Okay. All right. Sorry, I didn't see you there before. Okay. That's all talking about the Inyan of Moichin Stima and Chochma Stima, Chochma Gluya, or Moichin Stima and Chochma Gluya. That there's a kesher between them. You cannot say there's Ba'en Aroch, it's Gilu Helem. But when you're talking about the etzem of keser, that is where it's ba'en aroch. That is where there's no comparison. You can't measure and you can't compare chochma hagluya and keser itself. So the use the atzmus on keser l'man migera chochma legamre, since the essence of keser transcends chochma completely. V'hu is bligvu mamish, and it's absolutely bligvu. Therefore, Chochma is called Ba'en Aroch. So now we understand the Inyan. We just explained that there are two apparently contradictory statements. One is that Atzilus is Giloi HaHelem. It's what emerges from a state of concealment. And we also say that Chochma and how much more so, all the other spheroids are Yeshmi Ayin. And Ayin refers to Keser. So which of those two statements is right? So he explains they're both right. It's only that when we're talking about the lower madregas in Keser, in other words, where there are spheroids in Keser, then you can talk about Giloi hahelem. But when you're talking about the etzem inyan of Keser, what the whole inyan of Keser is, Lamala minas Sfirois, then you would say that Chochmah emerges from Keser, bebechinas yesh mi ayin. Okay? That's what we just explained. And the same thing is true when it comes to the Kav and the Or Ein Sof. So too with the Kav and the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. הנה לגבי שורש המקור הקו, האסס פירוס הגנוזויס, הרי הם בחינס גילוי ההלם. Therefore the kav to the esses פירוס הגנוזויס, which is the shorish of the kav, in the Or Ein Sof before the tzimtzum, in the Or Ein Sof hashayich la'olemis, as we've been explaining. So there the kav is bebechines gilui ההלם to the esses פירוס הגנוזוis. Aval lagabi atzmus Or Ein Sof, but when you're talking about the Indian of atzmus Or Ein Sof, I know how Or Shebechinas Ein Sof mamish. We're talking about etzem ha'or, then it's bebechinas Ein Aroch. The kav is bebechinas Ein Aroch to etzem ha'or. Okay. So now the mimer, the question that this particular mimer started off with is was a very simple question. The beginning of the Maimon is Pashas Nasso. Starts off, Nasso is Rosh B'nei Gershon Gam Haim. That's the Loshen, Gam Haim. Count them too. Now, the question that he asked was, why does that count them too? Like, that would mean that, well, maybe you have a Havamina not to count them. Why would you think not to count them? Have a Havamina not to count them? This is what he's going to explain now. Because of the avodah of Bnei Gershon, what they did in terms of carrying certain aspects of the Gershon Kosa Merari, just by the way, with the three tribes who came out of, the three families that came out of Levi, that had certain avodah in the Mishkan. Like their avodah in the Mishkan was to the avodah of Gershon was to carry the curtains. He's going to explain this now. Let's just get into it and we'll see. All right. Move on. Nasso is Rosh B'nei Gershon Gam Haim. Why it says them two, count them two. What's the Havamina? De'inai ba'Mishkan hayushnei inyonim Yeriyos of Mishkan va'Kelim. There was the Yeriyos of Mishkan and there was the Kelim. The Yeriyos, the curtains, and then the Kelim, the various vessels. For example, the Kior, and the Mizbeach HaZahav, and the Menorah, and so on and so forth. All of those are the Kelim of the Beis HaMikdash, and then there's the Yeriyos of the Beis HaMikdash, the curtains of the Beis HaMikdash. We Yadua, and we know Shezeu or Pnimi or Makif. Let me just go switch that off. Sorry, 1 second. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so we were saying that there's Yeriyos and there's Kelim. The Yeriyos represent the Inyan of Or Makif. The Kelim represent the Inyan of Or Pnimi. And that's what he's going to explain. Yadua Shezeu Or Pnimi Or Makif. The Yeriyos were Or Makif and the Kelim Or Pnimi. The Kelim, Aaron, Shulchan, etc. Hem bechinas Or Pnimi. Yeriyos hem bechinas Or Makif. Or Makif, in other words, they enveloped the entire Mishkan. These were the curtains that enveloped the entire Mishkan. The whole Mishkan was covered in curtains. Yes, it was the kroshim, the beams, and so on and so forth that had to be put over the beams and enveloped the entire Mishkan. Those are the curtains, the Yeriyos. Bnei Gershon, and Bnei Gershon were the ones that carried the curtains. And therefore, you might think that it's not shy to count their heads. Why? Because the head is the beginning of Pnimi. It's Or Pnimi. It's not Or Makif. Right? The Indian of the head is Be'etzem Or Pnimi Chochma, not Or Makif. So he's going to explain. To lift up the head, to lift up the moichil, Bechinas Asmus Or Ein Sof. Nesiyas Rosh means to lift up the head. It means literally to appoint them. They had to be appointed to their task. These were appointed to carry the Kelim, these were appointed to, Bnei Gershon were appointed to carry the Yeriyos, but nevertheless, that Indian of appointment, not only does it mean To be appointed, it means actually to be lifted up, to be elevated by their appointment. As you probably know, the inyan of a shaliach takes upon himself the inyan of the mishaleach. So the shaliach represents the one who sent him. So here they have a tafkid, they have a task, and to a certain extent they represent he who sent them. In other words, the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Their task lifts them up beyond themselves. In any event. So that's the inyan of Siyuz Roish, Ulahagbiya B'chinas Roish, U'moichim B'chinas Asmus Torah Ein Sof Baruch Hu, K'mo Shekasu, Su'u is Roish B'nei Yisrael, Legul Goloisam. Bring them up to the inyan of Legul Goloisam. What's the Gulgoiles? Gulgoiles is the Keser. The Rosh represents the brain. The Gulgoiles, the skull, represents Keser. As he says, that's the inyan of Keser. Lift them up to the Bechina of Keser, to the aspect of Keser. And therefore, we have a question about B'nai Gershon. Since B'nai Gershon were doing the avodah of Or Makif because they were carrying the curtains, maybe it's not shy to call to speak about them, to speak about the inyan of Nesias Roish, that they should be lifted up, that should be appointed as such to their task. Im kein B'nai Gershon shein noisa yeriyos b'chinas Or Makif ein sarich Nesias Roish. They don't have to have this Nesias Roish because we're dealing with Makif, not Roish. Nevertheless, our parsha starts off with Nasso is Rosh B'nai Gershon Gamheim. Why? Shegama or Makif ends in B'chinas Atzmus, because this Makif that we're talking about is not Etzem Or, it's talking about Or Ashayach Lo'elemus, or at least a lower Madrega in Or. It's not Etzem Or, it's not Atzmus, it's Or V'gilui. V'shayach sham Sefirot and case al kopanim, and at least the Indian of Sefirot and case is shayach over there in the Urios. Since the Urios had certain measurements and there were Urios over the Mishkan and so on, therefore it's shayach to the Indian of Sefirot, even though the Sefirot might be ein case and not Sefirot b'chinas gvul. And therefore, that's the reason why we say gamheim. Even they have to be counted. Al kein tzrichim gamken Nesias Roish. They also have to have the Indian of Nesias Roish. V'zeh v'shenemar Gam Haim, as far as they're concerned also. Therefore, the posuk says, Gam Haim, Shehagam, Shehaim B'chinas Or Makif, that even though B'nai Gershon represent the Or Makif, Mekom Makom Tzarich Yois Bohem, Nasso is Rosh B'nai Yisrael, is Rosh B'nai Gershon. There also has to be in the Siyas Rosh by them as well. Because we're not talking about the Etzema Or, we're only talking about Madregis in Or, lower Madregis in Or. Okay, Kitzur, Vazeo, Nase Adam, B'chinas Adam Da Atzilus. So the kit of this parak is that there's Nase Adam, Adam da Atzilus, but Tzalmeinu is the Shoresh HaOiros, and Kidmuseinu is the Shoresh HaKeilim, in the Rishimo. Mikomakom Gamba or Ein Sof, Shach Sfiros and Kates, even in Or Ein Sof, you have the in and Sfiros and Kates, as we explained. But Etzema Or Lo Shach Sfiros Klal, but Etzema Or is not Shach Sfiros. So again, we have the in of Etzema Or, not Shach Sfiros. We have the in Shebegilu La'atzmoi, the Or Shebegilu La'atzmoi, that's Ein Kates, and they have the Inyan of Or Shach Lo'olemus, that's where the Sfiros HaGenuzot are. But K'mo Or Ein Sof, Shefnei Tzimtum, K'mo Kain B'Keser. Just as you have in Or Ein Sof, you have also in Keser. Etzma Keser, B'chinas Ein Sof, and then there's Madregas in Keser, which are not B'chinas Ein Sof. They're Shaykh to Sfiros, and therefore the Sfiros that come out of them are only Begiloi HaHelem, and not Yesh Mi'ai. Yesh Shorsha Oros, there's Sfiros HaKlulim, and there's roots of the Oros, which are Klulim in Keser, there's roots in Keser. The Lagama Madrega Zu, that where the Sfiros are included in Keser, or a chokhmah hu b'chinas gilu hahelem, or a chokhmah only comes out as gilu hahelem. But legabe etzema keser, but when we're talking about etzema keser, then it's ein aroch, the or of chokhmah that comes out of there. But chokhmah me'ayin temotza, it's a madreg of ein aroch. V'zeh yisboy posuk Nasso is roish, and therefore we explained the posuk, and we've actually finished this mimer. Okay, any questions, Rabbi Isai and Birtai?
When we there is a concept of Chochmei Loe, what does it refer to in this kind of schema?
Chochmei Loe is B'derech Klal. It's a term which is not always used in the same precise meaning, but B'derech Klal it's referring to Chochmei Vatzilus.
Because if I recall correctly, so we say there is a famous statement that Hashem says that my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my chokhmah is not your chokhmah. And obviously, there is a connection between chokhmah of Atzilus and chokhmah Dasiya. But he would say that, or in that statement, it says that our chokhmah is limited by our moech and by the kli, and chokhmah Eloi is not limited, so it's completely
so
not
in that sense,
connected.
chokhmah Elah would be chokhmah l'mayla atzilus. Yeah, in that sense, yeah. Yeah, but again, in all of these things, I think I mentioned it last week, maybe, I don't remember. But a Talmud comes to his Rav and he's reading something in the Gemara and he says the word chamra, right? The word chamra. So he wants to know from his Rav, like, what does chamra mean over here? Does it mean wine or does it mean a donkey, right? Because chamra could be wine, chamra could be a donkey. So Rav says, he answers in state. It depends where it's standing. If it's standing on the table, then it's wine. If it's standing in the courtyard, it's outside, it's a donkey. So in other words, you have to look at the context. It depends on the context. Sometimes in some contexts, chokhmah Elah could be chokhmah Batzilus. In most contexts. But in that particular case that you're talking about, it's chokhmah l'mayla mi'atzilus.
Would we say the same thing about Odom she'me'al hakisa in the vision of
Adam al hakisa b'derech klal is the hamshocha of Atzilus into olam habriya.
right?
So it's
So
probably
this,
a lower madrega, but
in again, B'Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu in particular.
yes.
So this seems to be, it seems to be like a very similar concept, right?
Yes. Talmeinu would be Adam al hakisa, and Kidmuseinu would be the Ptsir Pnei Adam in the Merkava itself. Not on the kisei, but on the four sides of the Merkava, one of them was a Pnei Adam.
Right,
but the Pnei Adam, that would be Kidmuseinu. Masha'en kain, the Adam al kisei would be B'Tzalmeinu, yeah.
But because B'Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu in Abba Maimer, that refers to the Madrigas that before Tzimtzum, right? So is this also, would this state kind of, it could apply to both the, or would we say that no, the vision of Yecheskel really is talking about Atzilus and not the Madrigas beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, the Arizal explains that Yecheskel's vision was be'etzim in Olam HaYetzirah. He saw the hamshach of these inyonim, the way they nimshach into Olam HaYetzirah, but that's where his vision was. Masha'en kain Yeshayahu, so his vision was in Olam HaBriya. But the Chachomim saw much higher madrigas, and the Alter Rebbe actually addresses this in Tanya. I don't remember which parak in the Gershon Kodesh he addresses it.
Yeah, the Chachomim versus Nevi'im, right?
Right. When he speaks about that, and he says that Nevi'im saw the Muhusa Inya, right? Masha'aykan the Chachomim are only talking about the Inya. It's not the Muhusa Inya. Didn't experience the Muhusa Inya, and therefore the Chachomim talk on a much higher madriga than the Nevi'im. But nevertheless, that's yeah. All right. Any other questions? All right. I will post the video as usual. All the videos are posted on YouTube as Chassidus Decoded. Chassidus Decoded. If anyone wants the link, I can send you the link. But let me just see. Actually, I can just pull it up right now. Computer's slow right now. Switch accounts. Here we go. Okay. Chassidus Decoded. Oh, let me share screen and you can see it. Chassidus Decoded. Here is the channel name, which I can type in the chat if you want. How do I get to the chat? How do I get to the chat? Chat, here we go. Here it's in the chat. If you want it. But that's where it is. Yeah, as you can see, that's it goes, backwards, obviously, chapter 16, 15, 14, 13, etc., all the way to the beginning. Oops. All the way to the beginning of, I don't know what happened to 1, 2, and 3, but they should be there. I don't know. 1, 2, 3, and 4 should be there as well. If they're not, I'll have to upload them again. Anyway, that's where they are. So, all right, Rabbi Isai, we'll have to stop now, and see you next time. Next week.